righty. I want to start by reading the passage, the main passage tonight. We'll be certainly looking at some other ones. But it's 1 John 3:16. 1 John 3:16. And out of the Holman, it says this: "This is how we have come to know love. He laid down his life for us. We should also lay down our lives for our brothers." That's good, but let me read that in the contemporary English version as well, because I like how it says it a lot better. It says, "We know what love is because Jesus gave his life for us. This is why we must give our lives for each other." I just like that one better. I mean, they say the same thing, but I just like the way that one's worded better. Dawson Trotman was a Christian leader who was active in ministry in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. His ministry was mainly focused on reaching young people, high school students, and college students, as well as those who served in the military, specifically those that were in the Navy. His ministry was called the Navigators, which I imagine many of you have heard of before. In the summer of 1956, he was speaking at a Bible camp in upstate New York when he and a few students decided that they'd go for a boat ride around the lake that was there. Dawson asked one of the students, whose name was Aileen Beck, if she could swim. She said she couldn't. So he suggested that they trade places, since his seat would be more secure in the event of an accident. Well, a little while later, the boat made a turn into some choppy waves, and it almost capsized. In the process, Dawson and Aileen were both tossed into the water. Now, of course, he remembered that she had said that she couldn't swim. So he swam over to her and helped her keep her head above water while the boat turned and came back for them. Those that were in the boat were able to lift her up to safety. But as they reached for Dawson, he was pulled away by the current and he ended up going under the surface and he drowned. In his death, we see how Dawson Trotman put the Apostle John's words that we read earlier into action. He, in a most literal sense, laid down his life for a fellow believer. It was both a heartbreaking tragedy and a Christ-honoring sacrifice. A few days later, when Billy Graham preached his funeral, Billy Graham said, "Dawes died the same way he lived, holding others up." From what I've read, I've concluded that Dawson's entire ministry was spent fulfilling this biblical exhortation, which is to lay down his life for his brothers and sisters. In the years and decades before that fatal afternoon, in every day of Dawson Trotman's life was spent in service of others. Now, I don't know if any of us are ever going to find ourselves in that kind of a situation where we're faced to possibly having to lay down our lives, or where there's the possibility that we may have to lay down our lives literally for another person. I've never been in a situation where I needed to take a bullet or rescue someone that was in peril. It's just never happened to me. And I would imagine for most folks, it never will. But I'll tell you what will happen. And it will happen to all of us. And it will no doubt happen sometime this week. You're going to be called upon to literally lay down your life for another. But to lay down some of your time for someone else. Not literally lay down your life, but lay down your life in some respect for somebody else. You may have to let go of a few dollars for somebody else, or give a ride, or make a call, or prepare a meal, or help clean up someone's mess, or any number of things. You're going to have the opportunity this week to lay down your life in a spiritual sense for somebody else. It's an opportunity that comes to us just about every day. There's an old hymn that says, "Lord, help me live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer shall be for others." Now, on the back of your sermon notes, you're going to find that song. At the end of the service, we're all going to sing that together. Okay? That's the first verse of that song. And the words to that hymn are extremely accurate. I've read a lot of hymns over the years, and the words to this hymn, specifically since it was written when it was written, are still so accurate and so I don't know, they just gripped me. When I read the words, it was like, wow. And I thought, we got to sing that tonight. So that's what we're going to do here in a little bit. Our call, our mission, is to literally lay down our lives for others. With that in mind, tonight I want us to look at the last half of that verse that we saw earlier. And the phrase, "This is why we must give our lives for each other." So I want us to consider what that actually means and how we would go about doing that. As I said, only a handful of people ever find themselves called upon to actually give their lives for someone else. For most, it never happens in the literal sense. But for all of us, it happens almost every day in a spiritual sense. So I want to talk about how we lay down our lives for one another. And if you want to live an other-oriented lifestyle, there are 3 guidelines to consider. Here's the first one. We begin by moving away from center stage. Now, I've met some people where it would be more like moving away from the center of the universe. Okay? I'm talking about this need that some folks have to be the focus of everyone's attention, to always be in the spotlight, to make everything about me. We've all seen children who are this way. I've known parents who couldn't give birthday presents to one child without the other child getting upset that someone else was receiving a gift. I've known parents who, when they gave presents to one child, they had to give presents to the siblings as well in order to avoid some kind of a meltdown. People will sometimes excuse that kind of behavior, saying that they're just children. You know, kids are going to be kids. But here's the problem. Children who act this way often turn into adults who act this way. The kind of grown-up who is perpetually pouting and upset when they're not the center of everything. And I'm going to be honest with you here. I think we're seeing a whole lot of young adults in the world who fall into that category. I suppose we all have that tendency to some extent, because we're all sinners. And that's why it's our job as followers of Christ to make every effort to push that tendency aside. Every day of our lives, we have to remind ourselves that it's not about me. I'm sure you're familiar with the best-selling book of the 20th century, The Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. Is anybody who's read that, do you remember what the first line of that book is? Pretty easy to remember. Anybody remember it?
Well, it's not about you.
That's right. It's not about you. That's the first sentence in that book. Max Lucado liked that opening line so much that he wrote a book with an almost identical title called It's Not About Me. Do you know why both of these pastors said basically the same thing? It's because it's not about me and it's not about you. When we begin to think that it's all about me, we're at risk of becoming like King David, and not in a good way. Not in the man after God's own heart sense. We become like the David who, from the roof, observed an attractive woman who was bathing late one evening. And he decided at that moment that he needed her. Never mind that she's married. Never mind that her husband was currently deployed in the battle in service to the king. He never gave it a thought. Instead, he sent for her, slept with her, got her pregnant, and then had her husband killed. That's what happens to those who insist on being the center of it all. Everyone around them pays the price. Life is an ongoing process in which we have to remind ourselves that this isn't my party. I'm not the crown of creation here. I don't need or deserve to be the center of it all. And when we move away from the spotlight, then we're able to get our priorities straight. We're able to give Jesus center stage. And let's face it, he's the only one that deserves to be in the center. And do you know what happens when we make Jesus the central focus of our lives? He begins to direct our attention to those that we're called to serve. Because he says to us, feed my sheep. And that brings me to the second guideline that I want us to look at and consider. In order to live an others-oriented lifestyle, we build our lives on the principles of service and sacrifice. We need to remind ourselves each and every morning that I will be called upon today to yield a portion of my time, maybe a portion of my resources for someone else. And I will do all that I can in order to fulfill that calling. I recently read a story about a young woman when she was back in college. Her name was Caitlin Allmans. And she talked about a time that she remembered when her little sister had called her up and asked her if she could borrow a pair of boots for a high school event. There was only one big problem in that. Caitlin went to college in a town that was 2 hours away from her family in Odessa, Texas. To deliver the boots, she'd have to drive 2 hours each way. But she didn't hesitate. She said, I had only a 4-hour break between classes and theater rehearsal. So I drove all the way down to Odessa, dropped off the boots at the front door, and drove all the way back to school. And it's because my sister needed them. To say Caitlin cares for and loves her little sister would be a huge understatement. She said, my sister is my best friend in the entire world, and I tell people that all the time. I don't think I could make it a day without her. She's the person I turn to for everything. That genuine love and kindness doesn't just stop with her sister. She feels the same way about her little brother as well. A few years ago, she seriously considered moving with him to Los Angeles to help support him financially while he was in college. All because she loves her brother. That's what Paul meant when he said that we are to serve one another in love. This command applies to husbands and wives and parents and children and brothers and sisters and friends and neighbors and everyone else. That's where the Apostle Paul, that's what he was talking about when he wrote the following words in 1 Peter 4:10. Or the Apostle Peter, not Paul. He said, each of you has been blessed with one of God's many wonderful gifts to be used in the service of others. So use your gift well. Now, of course, the question often comes up, how much am I expected to give? How much is too much? How much is enough? C.S. Lewis had something to say about that, about the amount of our giving. Now, he's talking here about money, but the principle also applies to our time and other aspects of service. But this is what C.S. Lewis said in Mere Christianity. I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I am afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare. If our charities do not at all pinch us or hamper us, I should say they are too small. There ought to be things we should like to do and cannot do because of our charitable expenditure excludes them from us. That's what Paul is saying to us in the book of Philippians when he says, don't be jealous or proud, but be humble and consider others more important than yourselves. Care about them as much as you care about yourselves. And then that brings us to the third guideline that we need to consider in order to live an others-centered life. We need to remember that there is a close connection between living for others and living for Jesus. In Matthew 25, Jesus talks about the day of the final judgment, when he's sitting on the throne in heaven and the nations of the world are all gathered before him. And like a shepherd, he says he's going to separate the sheep from the goats, the good guys from the bad guys, if you will. To some, the sheep, he will say, I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, come receive your inheritance. Come and be a part of this glorious kingdom which the Father has prepared for you. For you looked after me when I was sick. You fed me when I was hungry. When I was in prison, you came to visit me. And when I had nothing to wear, you brought me clothes. And the sheep will ask, when did this happen, Lord? When did we feed you? When did we clothe you or visit you or take care of you? And Jesus said, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Now, I can't imagine anybody here who would ever turn down an opportunity to do something special for Jesus himself. We would consider that a great honor to be able to do something specifically for Jesus, if Jesus were here. And we forget sometimes that he extends that opportunity to us every day. He comes to us, as Mother Teresa once said, in so many distressing disguises, homeless, hungry, needy, and desolate. And we need to remember that whenever we serve those whom society would consider to be the least among us, Jesus takes it very personally. He receives your service as if it were directed to him and him alone. Speaking of Mother Teresa, there was a radio talk show guy named Pat McMahon in Phoenix, Arizona. And he once interviewed Mother Teresa for his program. And he was so impressed with her that afterward he told her that he wanted to do something just for her. He said, I'd like to help you in some way. And this is how she replied to him. Tomorrow morning, get up at 4 a.m., go out onto the streets of Phoenix, find someone who lives there and believes that he's alone, and convince him that he's not. According to Jesus, he's the one that we would encounter if we went out that early in the morning. He's the one that we would be serving. There's a very close connection, an unbreakable connection between serving others and serving the Lord. Who knows? There may come a time when you are called upon to step into harm's way for the sake of another person. If it should happen, you'll probably make the right decision. But I can promise you that there will come a time, probably sometime this week, when you're going to be called upon to step into inconvenience's way for the sake of another person. You're going to have the opportunity to serve and minister to this person. Might be a member of your family, might be a close friend, might even be a total stranger. I'm encouraging you to make the right choice. And if you do, Jesus will take it personally. He'll accept the sacrifice of your time and the resources that you give as a gift to Him, and He'll honor you for it. The book of Hebrews says in 6:10, God is always fair. He will remember how you helped His people in the past and how you are still helping them. You belong to God, and He won't forget the love you have shown His people. That needs to be our lifestyle. Now, as I said, on the back of your handout tonight, there's a song, a copy of a hymn. I got a recording, downloaded a recording of this hymn. It has all 4 verses. This is an a cappella setting of this song. It has several voices singing this song a cappella. When I first listened to it, I found a recording by Tennessee Ernie Ford. I love Tennessee Ernie Ford. A great bass voice. And I thought, man, that's the one I'm going to use. And then I listened to it again, and it wasn't going to work because the first verse was great. The second verse, of course, you know, when back in the day, when those recordings were made, you know, there was always this backup choir and that kind of a thing, and you know, it sounded very, very 40s-ish choir. But they changed keys and they went into the stratosphere on the second verse, and then the last verse, Tennessee Ernie Ford came back in, and he was singing notes that probably only Tom could sing. He was solo on it, and I thought, yeah, there's no way we can sing that with the way it jumped around. So I found a different one, a different version of it, and it's just as good. So to close out this tonight, I want us to sing. So it's going to start, and as we sing through this, pay really close attention to the words to this song, because they literally, I haven't found a hymn there's not been a hymn in a whole long time that I like the words to as much as I like the words to this song. Okay, Mike's going to start this for us. Oh, stop it, Mike. Helps if I unmute this, doesn't it? Okay, then start it again. Lord, help me live from day to day in such a self-forgetful way that even when I kneel to pray, my prayer shall be for others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let them motto be. Help me to live for others, that I may live like thee. Help me in all the work I do to ever be sincere and true, and know that all I do for you must needs be done for others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. Help me to live for others, that I may live like thee. Let self be crucified and slain, and buried deep and all in vain. May efforts be to rise again, unless to live for others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. Help me to live for others, that I may live like thee. And when my work on earth is done, and my new work in heaven's begun, may I forget the crown I've worn, while thinking still of others. Others, Lord, yes, others. Let this my motto be. Help me to live for others, that I may live like thee. Isn't that good?